Okay, so welcome everyone to our second in these series of webinars for prospective students put on by the Environmental Professional Programs Office. I'm Sarah Graves. I'm one of the coordinators, the coordinator of the Environmental Observation and Informatics degree. Also online is Megan Kautzer, the coordinator for the Environmental Conservation degree, and then Nathan Schilfer, the director of both programs. This will be a quick 5-minute overview of the professional programs. And then feel free to ask questions in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll be sure to address them at the end. So what are the environmental professional programs? These are professional masters. This is a professional master's of science degree. So it is an MS, it is a Master of Science, but it's professional in that it's structured a little bit differently than a research MS. We'll talk a lot about that at a different webinar, like what those distinctions are. But some of the highlights are that students complete 32 credits, all 32 credits of the program in 15 months. So it's quite condensed and quite accelerated. And it's for people wanting to advance or change their careers. So either early or mid-career professionals, but also just professionals just starting out. And then a big distinction or a big highlight is that it does not focus on primary research training. So even though it's a Master's of Science degree, the model is a little bit different than other Master's of Science degrees where you work on primary research under the advisement of a faculty advisor in a lab. For these programs, the focus really is on your professional development and making sure you're getting real helpful skills for you all to work in the environmental sector and to make that transition to your next career step really seamless and smooth. Another feature of the environmental professional programs is that they are cohort based. So what this means is that all students start the program at the same time and go through the program together. So we start all students in the programs in the summer, so in June, and then they go through the series of those 15 months and those 32 credits together as a unit. The cohorts are small in size, so each program, EC or EOI, ranges from a dozen or 15 to 30 students. So it's not huge groups of people that you're interacting with or taking classes with. It's a small, well tight-knit cohort of students. And this really promotes interaction and learning with your peers. We believe that students learn just as much from working with their peers as they do from hearing from their professors. And because the students in these programs come from a lot of different backgrounds, it's really nice to be able to share the knowledge and the expertise across the cohort. We also offer interdisciplinary training. That's sort of a core of the Nelson Institute. So we don't just focus on hard science or social science. It's looking at environmental issues from many different perspectives. So you'll get these technical skills, but it's really applying it to real world issues and the complexity of environmental problems. And with that interdisciplinary training, there's opportunities to grow your network across all of these disciplines. So whether you want to work in all these sectors or whether you want to focus, you'll get exposure to people and professionals in many different realms of environmental work. So I'm talking about environmental professional programs as a unit. It's one degree, but there's actually 2 program options. So if you take a look at it on our website, you'll see we have separate information for the environmental conservation option and the environmental observation and informatics option. So they're under the same umbrella, they're managed by the same office, but they're 2 separate programs and 2 separate curriculum. There is some overlap, as I'll share. But the environmental conservation, or the EC, program is focused on navigating complex decision-making, engaging with all people, managing programs, understanding science, and communicating effectively. This program has been around for about 8 years. It'll be the 9th year of the program next year. The other program option is environmental observation and informatics, which has been around for 4 years. It'll be its 5th year next year. And the training is slightly different. It's training in broadly environmental conservation, but also remote sensing, GIS, informatics, basically using big data at the intersection of geospatial and environmental fields. So what do these two programs look like in a little more detail? Here's a diagram where the different blobs, the different shapes are the focus of each of these programs and the different topics. So for example, environmental observation and informatics has more of a focus on geospatial technology, image processing, data analysis, but it also does professional development, leadership, communication. The environmental conservation degree is more focused on communication, people skills, community-based conservation, biodiversity conservation, but again, has this professional development, leadership development overlap that is also seen in the EC, in the EOI program. So they're distinct programs, they do have overlap. And if you have questions about which program might be right for you, please get in touch. Very briefly, here is the program timeline, which is another unique part of these professional degrees. It's 15 months, 4 terms or 4 semesters, start in the summer and continue in the fall in person on campus at UW-Madison. The spring semester, so starting in January, is virtual. So all of your classes are accessible online. If you choose to stay in Madison, you're welcome to come meet us in Science Hall, but you can access your classes from anywhere in the world if you choose to move away from Madison. And then the summer, there's no formal classes, but it's really spent on your project. So you're working with an organization anywhere in the world that project and that organization might take you. So a little bit more on that final summer. It's really the most hands-on, practical and applied part of these programs. And that's when you do the leadership project. So it's a project for about 8 to 12 weeks. And we'll talk more about it at a different webinar, but it's really this combination of your passion, your strengths, and your professional goals that you want to do to succeed and take the next step. So that's the core. But then it's also finding out where that aligns with an organizational need. And there is always overlap. And every year we have students who do amazing projects that meet at this intersection, and they work for great organizations like Conservation International or the Nature Conservancy, which are big international organizations, but also smaller organizations like the American Museum of Natural History or a government agency like the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. So these projects are diverse, but they're really individualized for you and your professional goals. That was a very quick rundown. There's definitely more information online if you want to explore our websites. There's a whole page on curriculum and these projects. And we're happy to answer questions as they come in. So I will stop that for now and let Megan take over as we transition into the topic of this webinar, which is careers with these environmental conservation degree programs. So we'll start off with a presentation about the EC, the Environmental Conservation Program, and then later on we'll transition to the EOI program. So go ahead, Megan.
Thanks, Sarah. It looks like I cannot do screen sharing. Is that something you could give me permission?
Okay, I think I changed that. So you should be set now.
Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Okay. Can you, actually, what I'm going to do is just move this over to this screen so I'm looking at the camera while I'm sharing. All right, Sarah, can you just give me a
Yep, looks good. Yep.
Okay, we'll move now into the webinar Introduction to Careers with an Environmental Conservation MS degree. My name is Megan Kautzer. I'm the EC Program Coordinator. A little bit about my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Conservation Biology and Zoology, as well as an Environmental Studies certificate from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I got my Master's of Education from the University of Missouri-St. Louis. And I did lots of different things, working both in conservation, out of conservation and education, throughout the time from my undergrad until I started working back at this position. But really, a topic of interest for me, the key space that I love is supporting capacity development. So helping individuals reach their highest potential, particularly in all aspects and all systems of conservation. So I coordinate all aspects of the EC program, including, if you all might be prospective students, managing the application process. I teach in a professional seminar and facilitate career planning for our students, and then also work with each student in the EC program to facilitate and support their final project connections that last semester that Sarah just talked about. So what type of work do you do for your job? We learned this from our EC students and graduates. And the data that I'll share is all from the first positions post-program. So we've had the EC program since 2013. So we are now working with our 8th cohort. So you can imagine over the last 8 years, graduates have moved on to different positions. But I wanted to start with this, where they went first. So as you can see, the majority of our students do go into this space of program management or program coordination. After that, this focus on ecology or the technical side, and any of the positions that fall into that space would be anybody who's working in the field doing research, working with GIS or any technical aspects as well. Following after that, students, graduates have gone into a large subset into communications and education. A core part of our program is teaching our students about how do we engage with different people, how do we build bridges, how do we message and frame and share ideas, particularly with those that might see things differently from us. So that's based in communication and education they're really well supported to move into that direction and thrive in those spaces. Similarly, the next one that follows, another large group, is working in community engagement and outreach. After that, we get into a little more specific spaces, such as conservation planning. And that's a critical course in the program. You work with an actual client to map through the conservation standards framework around effective decision making. Graduates have gone into policy or consulting. Several of our graduates have gone into continued higher education. A few in fundraising and development, and a handful in a number of miscellaneous directions. So thinking of our EC alumni, I've just put all of our graduate job titles into this word cloud generator, and you can see a lot of the things that stood out for us are in communications, coordinator, manager, program or project specialist, associate. We'll talk more about specific job titles shortly. So when we look at our graduates and think about what environmental topic do you work with, you could take a look at this graph that a large subset are working in positions that work with across all natural systems. So somebody who's working in conservation planning will be working with clients and project teams who are working on wildlife conservation, on land use, water, everything under the board. So a large majority of our students are working in a position where they get to sort of touch on all of these different aspects. But as you can see, we do have students who specifically focus on areas of wildlife, land use, water, be it marine or freshwater, in the space of the land use, specifically around forestry and agriculture. This other category, the miscellaneous other category, includes things like the energy sector, working with data software development, some indigenous rights work, waste management. So there's a number of students or graduates who fall in there. And lastly, we do have a focus for students working in sustainability or in urban landscapes. So when we ask for graduates, what sector do you work in? It's the two that are the top, you can see on either side, are the smaller NGOs or nonprofit organizations and state government. After that, we do have a number of students working in the federal government and larger NGOs. And large NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, are things like Conservation International, the Nature Conservancy, IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So these really large international NGOs that students might be working on international projects based out of the US or elsewhere. And smaller nonprofits, you think about any local land trusts or any nonprofit work in farming or agriculture that students might move on to work with. To give a snapshot of where EC students are, many of our graduates do remain in the Midwest. We have, I would say, about half of our cohort each year would be from the Wisconsin or Upper Midwest region, and half are from across the US and international. So this actually makes sense that we would have a lot of our graduates remain in the Midwest, and the Southeast as the second thereafter. A number of our graduates do work in the Washington, DC area. That is the international hub of conservation efforts globally. So that's a really important space for our students as well. So what can you do with an AC degree? I tried to capture a few of these areas that our students after they graduate head to. And then on the bottom are just some example job titles of what they might do with that skill set. So starting on the left, effective environmental decision-making. That's at the core of a number of our courses in the EC curriculum. So how do we approach decisions in conservation? What are the various threats? What are our goals? What are our steps to get there? What's our funding limitations? What does the community think about this? How do I engage with stakeholders? So thinking through that process can be overwhelming if you don't have a strategic kind of framework and direction on how to factor in all of those things to make effective decisions. So students learn through the program. They might become a conservation planning associate. They might also become an environmental consultant or a sustainability consultant, going to companies and organizations who say, I don't know how to make sense of all the information we have or to even figure out what information I need. And that's where an EC graduate might be able to come in and say, I can help you do that. We'll take care of that. And the second block is you would learn strategic communication and community engagement. A lot of our students think about how do we effectively engage and communicate with the community. So a student might go into being a public outreach officer, communications specialist, a project facilitator, community engagement coordinator. Anything along those lines are going to be a great direction for our students with an AC degree. And the third one, students can go into ecological and technical fieldwork positions. This, I would say, does also tie in, any of these ties in with our students' previous skill sets. So if a student had an undergrad degree in wildlife biology and then an additional Master of Science degree in environmental conservation, they would be very much setting themselves up to be successful in a position like a wildlife biologist. Whereas if you had a really strong interest in GIS, you might become a GIS technician. I had a student with a completely different background. It was mostly in language studies, and now she's working as a coastal scientist and restoration manager. So depending what your interest areas are and your previous skill sets, along with the skills you learn in the program, that would really help set you up to determine what you would do with an EC degree. And our fourth one here, manage programs and projects. We could see in the previous slides that that's a really key space for our students after the program. So thinking about project management, program management. So I've had graduates who are natural resources program coordinator, a Great Lakes coordinator, the US project manager. So a lot of these job titles where there's manager, coordinator in the title, that's a direction our students go. So this is a cloud that captures just the actual job title. So I'll give you a moment to take a look at this. And again, we can see a lot comes up around the words of coordinator, manager, engaging with the public, development, and focused on grants and fundraising. So I'll walk through and introduce just 5 students that are graduates of the EC program and where they are now. Marika works with the Conservation Coaches Network. Her job title is a conservation strategist and coach. And Marika is also an independent contractor in the sense that she is taking her skills learned in the program around conservation planning and stepping in where she can contribute. So Marika co-developed and teaches in a conservation planning online course. And the curriculum guides project teams and programs in effective management, monitoring, and evaluation of their international projects. Marika came with a background in journalism and communication, and she started the program in her 50s and made a shift later on in her career and has been doing really, really great work in conservation planning. Each of the stories that I'll share about our students will have a read more story attached to it, and we'll make sure that this is posted so you can access all of these to read more about these graduates. Chelsea is working with NOAA as a coastal zone management fellow. Chelsea is the one who I mentioned actually came in with a background with zero background in ecology or ecological sciences. Chelsea is currently, as this coastal zone management fellow, training in a coastal resource management through a highly selective fellowship. It's a 2-year fellowship. She builds relationships across governmental agencies, and this is in Guam, coordinates programming, creates communications content, and develops plans for Guam's coastal environment. Nathan is the U.S. project manager for Nature for Climate. He works under the umbrella of the Nature Conservancy, but he is working predominantly for what's called Nature for Climate, meaning how can we tap into natural resource, solutions for facing the climate crisis. So Nathan is building a coalition of partner organizations, elevating the role of natural climate solutions that they can play in reducing the impacts of greenhouse gas emissions. Nathan coordinates with a comprehensive steering committee. He leads cross-sectoral engagement efforts and manages communications and policy campaigns. Nathan's background is more on the policy side as a pollster, thinking about how people understand messaging and framing. So taking that really strength and his skill set in framing and messaging to the conservation space. Xi'an is now working for EcoHealth Alliance. She's the Southeast Asia Program Manager and Research Scientist. Xi'an focuses on emerging infectious disease spillover in the Southeast Asia region. And particularly, she manages programming to better understand the interactions and implications of increasing human-wildlife interactions. And lastly, I'll share about Ashley. Ashley's background is actually in interior design, and she's an entrepreneur and made this shift. She deeply cared about Native nations and Indigenous rights. She was working for the Wilderness Society as their Native Lands Partnership Coordinator. Ashley identifies how to support Native communities developing engagement objectives with Indigenous partners. She strengthens public support for legislation that protects the rights and interests of Native nations. Specifically, her focus area that she cares deeply about is in the Southwest region where she's from. So Sarah, I will pass it back to Sarah to talk about EOI. And I see, Sarah, we're at about 12:26. I'm not sure if we might want to take a 3-minute break and come back since we said we'd start with you at 12:30.
Yeah. Yes, let's take a break. We've had a few questions come in, so we can just pause and address those questions before moving on. One question was about if this program is a good fit for someone who wants to do a PhD. So I did respond to that in the chat, and I would say generally, the focus of our training is not on primary scientific research, as would be the focus of what you would do in a PhD program. So you don't work directly with a research advisor in their lab, and you don't have a goal of sort of publishing peer-reviewed research. So that said, a handful of students have gone on to PhD programs because of their background, their professional goals, how they felt like they worked with a faculty mentor here, or if they found someone somewhere else. They have gone on to a PhD, and that training has been really useful for them, or the training from the programs has been useful, and is often a foundation of any coursework, and basic training is often a foundation of any PhD program. So they've been able to translate their knowledge and their coursework to PhD programs, even though it hasn't been the goal. But we're happy to talk with any individual because it really depends on your background and your goals and how you shape the program for yourself. So please get in touch if that's something you want to explore afterwards, either with myself or Megan. And then another question that came up was about funding and how you apply for funding. This is also a great question. We do get this question a lot. I will direct you to our FAQ page on the website to just get more information about funding in a written sort of way with good links and everything. One thing to know about these programs is we do not offer full funding packages like you would see with a teaching assistantship or a graduate assistantship. So that's not available to students in these programs because of their accelerated timeline, their focus on professional development. What we do offer though is, scholarships essentially in the form of our tuition assistance award. So anyone who's applying to these programs also can apply for the tuition assistance award, international, domestic, anyone applying. Megan put the link to the FAQ, and she can also put the link to the tuition assistance application. So you're welcome to apply for those, and that helps reduce the cost of tuition and offset the cost of the program. There's more information on the FAQ about how else students fund themselves and get funding for these programs. Again, it really depends on you as an individual. So check out that FAQ page, but also get in touch with us if you have questions about your situation and what might be possible. So those are the questions that come in. Please continue to ask them in the Q&A, and we'll address them. Megan, anything else to share before we move on?
I think that's good. Do you have the presentation?
Yep, I have the presentation pulled up. Sorry, we just had a fire alarm here. So as Megan was talking, our fire alarms were going off in the building and we had to leave. It's a little behind the scenes drama. Okay, I will share my screen. Okay. So hello again, everyone. I'm Sarah Graves. I am the EOI program coordinator. So EOI, again, is one of the two options within the environmental professional programs. I'm really happy to be in this coordinator position. Like Megan, I do have a background in this, so I'm able to really understand this field and help advise and guide students through their career path and development. I have a background in environmental science and ecology, and actually a GIS certificate from UW-Madison. Before the EOI program existed, I had to get a GIS certificate. And then I went on to grad school at the University of Florida, where I studied remote sensing, so airborne, really cool airborne images to map and model forest dynamics. So that's what I have done in the past. I've done field work and data analysis work focused on trees. But like Megan, I coordinate all aspects of the EOI program. We work very closely together, but I focus on the EOI program students. So talking with prospective students, getting them oriented, teaching a professional seminar, and then really helping with the project placements. So that's a little bit about me. So the big question that I get asked all the time is, what do EOI graduates do? What sorts of jobs can you get with an EOI degree? And again, like Megan showed, this is data from a survey of EOI graduates, and this is what we see as their first job out of the program. About 80% of graduates were employed within a relevant job in the field within 6 months of graduation. And this is just a snapshot of the type of work that they do. So not surprisingly, most, over 75% do some sort of geospatial analysis for their job. That's what they're trained for. That's the jobs that they're interested in. So that's what they're doing, which is encouraging. A little over a quarter of them have some sort of software development or programming or data analysis in their job. So this is a bit more technical than general geospatial analysis. It's really focused on, computers and softwares and programming. And the same amount go on to some component of having research in their job. So that could be someone that continued on through higher education and is in a PhD program, or works for an organization or an agency where they're, collecting data, answering scientific questions to guide management or decision making. And then a small component of people with their job do communications directly. So do some sort of visualization, outreach, communication related to data or environmental work. And then where we're seeing people work, so where do people get jobs? We see differences across different sectors. So roughly just these 4 sectors, private, government, nonprofit, and academic, we are seeing that most students, a little over half, are going on to work for private companies. Again, this is their first job right after the program, and it can be small companies or big companies, but over half of them work for a private organization. About a quarter end up working for government, a state agency, federal agency, or sort of international intergovernmental agencies. 20% work for nonprofit organizations, again, big or small. It could be, a local water conservation organization or a big organization like Conservation International. And then a few go on to stay in academia, and these are the people that we're capturing that continue on to PhD programs. And then where geographically do they go? Most stay in the Midwest. The nature of where we are located and where a lot of students come from is the Midwest. Certainly a lot of those people are Madison, but it is also people that end up in, I think Minnesota is a big hub for where people get jobs. And then there's always the draw out west. So again, we do get a lot of students from out west, so they return back to their hometown or home city. So about a quarter of people work out west. And then a smaller number go to the southeast or the northeast. Again, a nature of, are they from there or are they being drawn to jobs in DC? So the northeast is really the DC jobs that we're seeing. And then 15% work internationally. And these are mostly students that were international students and they're going back to their home country, but it's also, a handful of people that have were US students and then found work internationally. I tried to show you all of the job titles our students have had. It's not very visually pleasing, but this should give you an idea of the diversity of job titles. One of the challenges with these degrees is that there's no one set job title. And you really have to be aware of kind of the theme of what things are called. So in general, we see a lot of geospatial analysts. That's sort of a catch-all for working with geospatial data. GIS technician is another one we see a lot. But if you look at some of these other words, there's, GIS specialist, geospatial technician, geospatial or scientific programmer, GIS and remote sensing specialist. So there's different flavors of these jobs and they're all slightly different. So that makes searching for jobs a little bit more challenging because you can't just find one job title, but it also shows you kind of the diversity of ways people find themselves in this sector. So that's just a little snapshot of the job title. And like Megan did, we can sort of condense or simplify these diverse job titles into different themes or categories of what people do. So beyond just geospatial analysis, which we know people do, there's different flavors of geospatial analysis. So here are the 4 themes and some examples, and I'll and some example job titles. And after this, I'll give examples of students who have done each of these jobs or these different themes. So what can you do with an EOI degree? One thing you could do for a job, or a focus of your job, could be to analyze and visualize geospatial data to support projects. So you could be on a team of a lot of people working on many different projects, and you're sort of the geospatial expert that supports a large number of projects. So these are titles that we see like geospatial technician or spatial analyst, geospatial analyst, those that are really common. So these are where you're taking your spatial skills and applying it to a number of different diverse and cool projects. You could also be a little bit more focused on the technical side, like what I said, and get a job where you're more performing complex data analysis and processing and tool development. So you might not be working with, a ton of geospatial data for different projects. You might really be in how do you analyze and process specific kinds of data. So these are titles, job titles like a scientific programmer or remote sensing technician, where you're a little more honed in on your tasks and how you work with that data. And you do it in a little bit more complex ways. And maybe you're only working with scientists or with other geospatial analysts, and you're just sort of doing a lot of the back-end data processing. So moving out of the more technical data stuff, we also see students who are managing projects and data. So program managers, spatial data coordinators, these are people who clearly are using their geospatial data skills and their awareness of how to work with this data, but they might also be doing other things with their job. So they might be presenting, doing communication or an outreach, or managing large projects, not just the geospatial data, but also working with clients or stakeholders or community members. So they're doing a lot of different things, but using the expertise and knowledge that they have of geospatial data to help support that work. And then the final bucket or theme is more of a scientific one, where we see people investigating patterns, answering questions for scientific endeavors. This could also be, collecting field data. So these are where your scientist is in the job, applied scientist, conservation scientist, spatial data scientist. They're really like generating data and knowledge to answer questions. So those are the different flavors of what you could do. So as some examples to make it a little more tangible, I'll go through each one of these and give you an example of what an EOI alumnus has done. So in the general geospatial analyst technician role, we have Paxton, who is actually a NASA developed fellow. So even though her job isn't geospatial analyst, essentially that's what she's doing as a fellow with this NASA developed program. So she works to promote on projects for capacity building, educating people on remote sensing, partnering with different organizations to build environmental knowledge in different sectors and solve ecological issues, all with NASA data. So NASA produces a lot of satellite data. So she's really using that satellite data to support many different projects with different partners. You can read more about Paxton and her work at an article on this article, which we'll provide a link to. Then there's Grace, who is this program coordinator role. So the person who's not just doing geospatial analysis, they're also managing projects and people. She is an international program coordinator and geospatial analyst for the Center for Large Landscape Conservation. And she primarily is coordinating a project that looks at the capacity for implementing wildlife friendly linear infrastructure across Asia. So there's a grant that organization got, and she's managing that grant in addition to doing a lot of the geospatial analysis work for this big international project. Going back to our sort of really technical programming side of things, we have Stuart and Eli. Stuart is a geospatial software engineer. He works for the Forest Service, but also Air Fire, which is part of the University of Washington. And he's really generating models and tools to help scientists communicate and share information about forest fire, smoke, air quality. So he's working out west. Obviously, air quality and smoke and fires, it's a huge thing. So he's primarily working with scientists to use that data and make it accessible in tools and visualizations for the public. And then Eli is a scientific programmer. He works at Conservation International, and he supports large international projects, but by generating data and creating tools and visualizations and software for Conservation International to use with their clients and partners to make decision-making around conservation. Both Stuart and Eli did come in with a background in software engineering, so that's why they're able to have these roles. You wouldn't come to the EOI program and all of a sudden know how to be a software engineer. There's simply too much to learn with geospatial data analysis and environmental issues to get all of that software engineering experience. So while you do get exposure to programming and working with a variety of software, and people do have that as part of their work, people aren't getting jobs as software engineers unless they're coming in with some of that background information and knowledge. And then we have Tatiana, who is filling that sort of research track role as a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin. Certainly research happens outside of academic institutions, and it's not just in PhD programs, but I just wanted to highlight Tatiana because she did find great opportunities while she was here in the program to continue her education, and it was something that she wanted to do professionally. So she continued on working with her advisor in the soundscape ecology lab, analyzing sound data to understand the effects of selective logging in tropical forests on biodiversity. So while for her EOI project, she wasn't doing primary research, she was working with some of that data and working with the Nature Conservancy to understand how TNC is valuing selectively logged areas. That experience was critical for her understanding selective logging and biodiversity for her to then transition into her primary research for her PhD. That's it. Those are the stories and the themes of what I wanted to share. We're happy to answer questions now, go into any more examples, but just general questions. We have about 15 minutes, so we're here to hear from you. So please don't be shy. And let us know what questions you have. Megan, is there anything to address right away?
We had a chat question and I responded directly, but they were saying, they said, wait a minute, I like both of these programs and my school background and the jobs that I have had both fit the programs, fit my interests, both programs fit my interests. Could I apply for both programs? Should I decide on one? If you find yourself in that position, we would highly recommend that you reach out to us or give us your email, something, so we could set up an actual one-on-one phone call. A lot of times we do find that sometimes students very much fall in one bucket or the other, but if you do have that, we have had, where you're interested in both. We take a look at, okay, what are your goals? What do you want to learn about? What skill sets do you want to expand on or broaden? Do you want to go deeper in certain areas that you have a background experience in? So all of those things are different for each student. So whether you apply to both programs or you decide before to apply to just one, you still will need to navigate and have that conversation and figure that out. Which one would I want to go with? So having that conversation in advance just saves you a lot of time to applying to both programs. Nothing is stopping you. I think you can apply to 3 at the same time under one submission. But that would be the best way to help you navigate and figure out, is EC or EOI the better fit for me now and for my career moving forward? And we're happy to have those conversations with you. Myself, Sarah, we can talk about the program in particular. Nathan loves talking with you as a professional, thinking about how does this situate for my career moving forward? What's out there in conservation and how could I apply my skill sets to it? So we're all happy to talk to you, and that would be our suggestion, is to reach out and having a conversation with each of us.
Exactly. And students have applied before, but in the process of applying, I think it does become clear as you write your letter which program is a little bit more aligned with your interests. And you have time. Application deadline's not till December 1st. So it's good you're thinking about it now. We can have these conversations now. You can do some exploration based on what we shared here. So you don't have to make your decision immediately.
I was thinking, one of the things I was thinking is we sort of touched on it, Sarah, especially when you're talking about Stuart. Every student who comes to the programs has a different level of experience, different types of experience, different skill sets, different interest areas. So when we are talking about like what direction do our students go, when they graduate, what jobs are they going after and do they obtain? They're prepared for a whole subset of jobs. And the jobs that they go after and secure are typically connected with what are they prioritizing and what are their previous skill sets. So if we think about somebody who's entering as a biological technician at a more entry level position, might be a student who is a recent undergrad graduate who comes to our program or has a year or two of experience, versus somebody like Nathan Henry, who I talked about earlier, had 20 years of professional experience when he came to the EC program. So the jobs that he's able to go after would look different. And as such, why he would be in the US regional manager of a program. So keeping in mind that what your priorities are, what your skill sets are, natural and developed professionally, as well as, I know, Nathan, we talk about this too, your geographic limitation or openness can be a big determinant for how fast you get a job or if it's the most fitting for you. So all these different factors come into play for each, because each graduate is an individual person. They're going to have different priorities. So just something I was thinking about. Nathan, do you have anything to add to that? I was just thinking about like timelines and where people end up.
No, I really don't have anything to add to that. I think it covers, I mean, there are a lot of factors and you can't control them all, but through the course of the program, you're focusing in on the things you can control. You are right. Flexibility is always helpful, particularly early in your career once you're out of the program, but it doesn't always have to be that way either. But no, nothing specific to add. Lots have been covered, including with your answers here in the questions. And again, thinking about where one fits in this space.
I don't know if this is a question. So, well, Nathan, I'm wondering if you've been with the program from the very beginning, seen students graduate every single year. What's it been like to sort of see how, so a student graduates, get a job, and then they'll work their way up. We're now 8 years out. Just how you've seen graduates progress in their careers.
Yeah, it's a great question. It is true that when you look back over time, you have started to see people working their way through their career. That's even true in EOI now. There's like just enough time under our belt from when that first cohort graduated that people are finding new positions and being able to move up. Megan, something you and I have spoke about that's been really, really cool about EC is now we're starting to see some of our graduates become host supervisors. So not only have they moved up in their organization, they're now managing programs and running things in a way that they have a lot to offer as a mentor. Some people we've also seen found work they liked and they're maybe there and they're really digging in and contributing in that project and growing with that project. Yeah, people have been able to move through their career. It is a bit cliche to say that it's difficult to get your foot in the door. That can be true. And it's also a bit cliche to say that, but once you're through, a lot of opportunities open up, but that's also true. And so, people might start over here doing one thing, and now they're kind of in a completely different space, thinking about even different areas of emphasis within conservation. Definitely a career in a sector where you have the chance to have sort of a winding path in a way that continues expanding your interests and allows you to keep on learning about new things. But yeah, quite a few people have been able to work their way through. I mean, even Megan, we were on that Zoom this morning with Kate and Lindsay, right? Kate's a graduate of the program who's now moved into a new position and hired Lindsay, who's a recent graduate of the program, and they're both working on a trajectory where they're moving themselves forward. Limitless opportunities. Even myself since the start of this program have moved through different spaces in it. So.
Yeah, well, feel free to keep asking questions. We're here for the next 8 minutes. If you don't ask questions, we certainly will keep talking because we just like to share things. And Megan, maybe a question for you is, and I know we've seen this with students coming in, is, there's some students like Nathan Henry or like Eli who totally know where they want to go next, and they have a vision and they just are going to go, this is the next step, and these programs sort of help them get there. But I'd say what's more common is for students to come in and say, I think I want to work here. I don't really know what's out there. I don't really know how to get into that. What types of things do those students do in the program to help them navigate that space? Can you talk a little bit about your class and the structure? Yeah.
I love this question. One, I would say, especially for those who are like, I know I care about this. I'm passionate about this space. I care about the earth. I want to contribute and just find a place that I fit. I don't know where that is. So a huge part of our program is building self-awareness first. Reflection. What are my strengths? What are the areas that I'm interested in? Where do I want to grow? So not only through our one-on-one conversations that Sarah and I have with each of our students to explore that, we also have things in our professional development seminars that are explicitly focused on how can I learn more about myself to find out how I can contribute. On the flip side, we also know that like students don't know people. You don't know what you don't know. So it's hard to just explore it on your own and figure out like what's even out there for me to step into. For instance, yesterday in our seminar, we had a guest speaker who's a member of the Bad River Band of the Anishinaabe. He's a Native Nations tribal member. And he shared about traditional ecological knowledge and various histories around Native Nation and Indigenous peoples in this state of Wisconsin. And I had 2 emails from students after who were like, I'd sort of heard of that, but I didn't really know what it was. I'm so glad we learned more. That's the sort of thing that comes up over and over with any of those individuals who are like, I care about this space, but I don't really know how I fit in. So students discover topics and areas that are possibilities to work in through the program, through the courses. They also discover more about themselves, their strengths, the areas they want to grow in and develop, the things that really inspire them that click. Usually, Sarah, I bet you have this too. Students are going through classes and they're like, this is just like really working. I like this. I like how it works. It makes sense to me. Can I do this? I'm like, yeah, you can do that as a job. So both the self-discovery and just exploring what's out there are ways that students figure out the direction they want to go. And really part of that too is then leading to the project experience that last semester. So that project experience, we say to students, well, yes, it's important and it's exciting and you get to apply the things you've learned and apply yourself in a real tangible way. It's not what you're going to do the rest of your career. It's one very rich experience that you can reflect on, that you can build connections around, that you can network, learn from mentors. It's an opportunity to then take to your next steps in your career, certainly. But it's just that it's not going to be setting, oh, I have to figure out exactly what I want to do and do it for my project and I'm locked in. So there's lots of opportunities, even for those who think they know this is what I want to do, are growing their awareness about themselves and what's out there, which is really exciting. As like the coordinators and the directors, like we get to watch grown people figure out what they care about, what they're good at, what they can get paid to do, and what the world needs. It's that perfect little niche. So it's really a great joy for us to be able to help, professionals find that spot.
Yeah, exactly. Well said, Megan. And Megan has training in career development, so it's explicitly part of this program. Other programs might give you the classes and say, hey, go figure it out. We build it into the program because it is so important, because we don't want you graduating being like, okay, now what? I just finished school. What do I do? We ask you that question pretty much the first 2 weeks of the program, just to have you spend time and figure it out. If there's no more questions, I'll just put a plug in for our other webinars coming up here in the next few weeks. Oops. What am I doing? I'm presenting. Nope, I can't present this. Sorry. So our other webinars coming up in the next 2 weeks. Why don't I do this? I'm going to go to the website and show you the website. The one in 2 weeks is focused on what is a professional master's program. So we sort of answered this question kind of in the beginning about, is this good for research to do a PhD, or why is a professional program unique? So that session thank you, Megan, we'll talk explicitly about the project experience and what makes these programs different than a more typical, although it's not as typical anymore, a more research-focused master's program. So that one should just be half an hour with both myself and Megan. You can dive into that topic. Following that, on November 4th, we will go back into focusing on EC and EOI specifically, and really looking at the curriculum of these programs. So what classes you are taking and the skill sets and the knowledge gained from those classes. So that'll be an hour long, starting with EC and then EOI. And then after that, because we're getting close to that December 1st application deadline, it'll be all about like wrapping up that application. There's a couple weeks after that to sort of put things together. So, really looking at your statement of interest. If you're applying to EOI, thinking about how you're going to refine that portfolio, making sure you're getting your letters of recommendation. So that last session will be reminders and tips about completing your application by December 1st. Information about all of these things, if you can't wait until then, is on our website. So if you're really curious about the curriculum, you can check out the curriculum for each program and get the information there. And then if you can't attend the webinars, they will be recorded and posted on this page. We'll send you an email afterwards with links. And if you missed the first one with Nathan talking about current trends and priorities for conservation, that's posted online, so you can view that as well. And with that, we're at 1 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us. Thanks for your questions. We'll sign off now, but feel free to get in touch with us at any time after.
See you.